Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. That's something in the Bible that's represented in Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. And I know, speaking from experience, sometimes it really doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like God can hear me knocking. It doesn't feel like I can hear him knocking from the other side. And sometimes it can feel pointless when we get lost in the everyday jargon and mess in our lives all the time. And today I want to break down the verses, Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. I've been researching this for probably like 2 weeks, and it's been amazing what God has shown me and how I've been actively applying the word that I've been, I almost wanted to say coming up with, but I didn't come up with the word, right? It's the foundation. But when you have a relationship with God and you read a text and you sort of meditate on it, I would say, but more than that, you're like actively pursuing truth within the text, it'll transform your understanding of what that verse means, not only in the bigger picture in regards to his kingdom, but locally when it comes to your life and dealing with everyday things. And it's been incredibly humbling what I've been able to find out about myself and about the deeper meaning of the text. And so, without further ado, if you don't know me, my name's Cody. This is a Frequency and Faith channel. And let's go down the rabbit hole, I suppose. So, Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. I'll just start reading from the top here. It says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." I'll start from a really high level overview, and then we'll just sort of spiral down and get into the granular details as we go. And then I'll bring it all back at the end. So, starting with the overview, what I deduce this to mean is those of us that ask God for a door to be opened while having a correctly postured heart will be given a spiritual map of sorts, entailing which direction we need to go to find the door. Okay? If we should take up our cross selflessly, move forward, embrace the suffering and hardships of our divinely appointed adventure, God will lead us to said door. When we reach the door, if we take action, follow and embody the commands God gives us, and act them out accordingly, the door will be opened for us to enter. And there's a lot to unpack here. And I'll start with the divine promise of response. So when you go and pray and you ask, if you have the heart that is postured in a manner where you genuinely believe God is listening, and not only listening, but he actively cares for you. He hears your prayers. He sees what is done in secret. I talked about that last week. He sees what is done in secret. And I don't just mean that in a negative sense. He sees the work that you're doing that no one else does. And I can personally relate to that when it comes to, well, for instance, creating YouTube videos, right? Like, I don't know if anyone's going to watch this or care, but that doesn't matter because God's watching me and he sees what I am doing in secret and he knows how my heart is postured. Therefore, if I continue to ask, seek, and knock, the door will be opened. Where that door leads, I don't know. Does it even lead to anything here on YouTube? I don't know. Does it lead to, let's say, perhaps he's increasing my skills in verbalizing thoughts that I have in my head and presenting to large crowds for the sake of teaching others in my IT endeavors at work? as a programmer or an architect. Perhaps he's using me here for someone else to come and listen to my videos on a one-off chance, and then it'll stir something in their heart, and then they'll become something great because of something that I said which just hit them just right. Maybe it was due to the fact that no one cares what I'm talking about on here right now because I don't have a following. And none of that really matters. God can do anything with anything, right? We've all had instances where we've seen something in the world that no one else cares about, but it's beautiful in the moment. If you're very drawn to art, you can relate to this sort of transcendent moment where you see a piece of art or you're listening to a song and you just get lost in bliss. That is the sort of otherworldly feeling and pulling, I think, that is being described here when God says, seek and you will find. And when it comes to the divine promises of God specifically, we think about him being beyond all of our understanding. And then we think about him being our father and the relationship there as we know it, and how he has created us to also produce children ourselves. So we know the dynamic between a mother and child, a father and child. Therefore, we can relate to him being described to us as being a father. Now, think about what a father does for you. He takes care of you in a way that goes outside of what you deserve. He loves us and cares for us as a mother does a child, and a child can act out of term, and yet a mother will still love the child despite those actions because that is her responsibility. And the child has free will to act out of the standards that she is setting for that child, whether that be through actually teaching verbally or the child is watching the parent's behavior or her behavior in this example of the mother. Even if the child goes out of line, she still loves it. And the same thing is true for a father, of course. A father will discipline their kids and tell them what to do. Now, even though the kid will act out, for example, I used to have the responsibility of feeding and watering the dogs. My parents had a lot of dogs. They used to raise and breed and sell dogs. So we had many of them, and there'd be troughs with water in it, and it would freeze during the winter. And then you'd have to thaw the ice within there and then fill it up. There'd be days that I was too lazy and I didn't want to do it. And there would be repercussions for that. I would get punished for that. My dad was teaching me great lessons there, but he still loved me. The reason that he was punishing me was because he was loving me and he was caring about the person that I would become someday. And then how I would influence my children someday or influence other people in the world someday. To bring this back to the biblical text, starting in verse 9, he's describing the sort of relationship that he has with us. He says, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. He's essentially saying, look, if you can take care of your kids, even though you are evil and were evil because of the fall, which happened in the Garden of Eden, when Eve was, I wouldn't say persuaded by the snake, but was presented a scenario for the snake to eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, don't do that. And then after that, God kicked them out of the Garden of Eden. And that was the fall, as is described in the Bible. And since then, we have sin in our species. That's part of us now, essentially. That's something we have to contend with all the time. And God is saying, even though that has happened, you're able to take care of your kids. If you can do that, how much more will a benevolent being, God, as he's the only thing in existence that is purely good, how much more will he take care of you? So when you're asking and seeking something from the Lord, Do it with a heart that is postured in the belief that He hears you and He is going to answer. And not only will He answer, but it'll be the best answer. It may not be the way that you're wanting, or it may not even be, you may not even receive what you're asking for. If it were pulled up right in front of you now, you might reject it. There's times when God has answered my prayers through a sequence of events, and during the process of asking and seeking and knocking, I have been transformed. And then when He answers the prayer, I happen to be ready to receive it at that moment in time. And that's part of the seeking and the actual knocking being in action. That speaks to actively living in faith rather than passively praying, which is the next point that I want to get to right now. And that is the relationship between action and response. Faith requires active participation. Your willingness to act and the level of discipline while doing so shows your trust in God. Moving in faith also has a compounding effect, as in, you can do one thing and it'll build your faith up, and then you can build upon that little foundation of faith itself, and it'll just keep growing and growing and growing over time. It's similar to, let's say you start going to the gym, and after 3 weeks, you start to notice some gains. You're genuinely getting stronger. And not only stronger, but you're feeling better about yourself because you are willingly submitting yourself to suffering in order to change. And that's very similar to what God preaches and tells us to do in the Bible. That's exactly, well, not exactly, because Jesus did way more than just that. But Jesus interfaced with the world and embodied suffering. And He died for people that spit on Him and hated Him, called Him a liar, so that He could save them through the act of being nailed to the cross. And that relates to actively pursuing the things in which you are asking and seeking God to provide you answers for. There is something to be said about keeping your focus on the treasures of heaven while also being mindful of what's in front of you here and now, not getting lost in the worry of one day, which causes you to spill all of the seeds that God is using you to plant in your life. Or perhaps you're past that stage and you are watering the garden that first started from the seeds that you were planting maybe a couple weeks ago. We have to live our lives in ways that reflect our belief. In the self development world, you'll hear a lot that you have to start moving before you believe it. And then your mind will kind of catch up with your actions. And that's very true. Sometimes, actually, many, many times, I almost want to say most of the time, it is most of the time when you start out, where you're not going to believe that what you're doing is really going to equate to something that will change your entire life in psychology and philosophy in a way that'll render you as a different person or bring about the miracles that God is calling you to. Even if you do have a great dream, it's hard to believe sometimes because you can look at yourself in the mirror or look at your past and think, I was capable of doing that or falling for that or being the victim of that. Or maybe I was the one who was the transgressor in a certain altercation and I'm at fault. And therefore, someone was my victim. You can think about things in your past and think that God can't change that or that you can't change that. Really, that's a big problem when you think that just because I don't believe that I can change it doesn't mean God can't. But it takes your active participation and you using your free will that God has given us to endure the suffering of change and the suffering of carrying your cross. It takes lowering yourself to God in a manner that represents the admittance of, I need your assistance in order to accomplish what you're calling me to do. I can't do this myself. I've said it before in my other videos. It's not that God won't ever give you something that you can't accomplish, because He will. He does. He does. He gives you things that you can't accomplish by yourself. That's the whole point. It requires His assistance. It requires Him being your father and you asking and seeking and knocking on the door in order for Him to open it and be like, this is it. This is what we were coming to the whole time. And then when you finally get to the door and open it, it might not even look like what you thought it was going to look like in the beginning. So now we'll start digging into the more granular details of what I have here in my notes. Understanding the three actions of asking, seeking, and knocking. I feel that asking represents prayer. I don't think anyone would probably disagree with me, and prayer can look totally different than what people generally think. For instance, in the Bible, there's an example that I'll probably bring up later where Nehemiah wants to go rebuild Jerusalem because it has been destroyed and is not what it was in its former glory days. And he is walking to this king in the story of the Bible. And the way that the story is written, it shows that he's praying as he's walking. He doesn't have time to get on his knees and pray. It's like he's actively moving in faith and praying in his head on his way to the king. And so you can pray as you're moving around. That's quite different than passively waiting for God to just miraculously pick you up. There is purpose in the story of Jesus having to carry his cross or the disciples having to go through great hardships in their life. There's purpose to it. There's purpose in moving and using your God-given free will to lie down what you want in order to pursue what God has called you to do and put in your heart for the sake of furthering His kingdom and others. So when you ask things in prayer, you need to be conscious that you are needing His help. You require His assistance. That's how your heart should be postured. And it should be enacted in a way wherein you know that He's listening and He hears you. He sees what's done in the dark. And you understand that even if He doesn't answer at that exact moment in time, it is for a good purpose, the best purpose. He will answer you in the way that is right, which brings us to seeking. Now, seeking, I and a lot of others, people that read these verses, they correlate that to actively pursuing something. And I've also heard some pastors talk about sometimes seeking is when you passively pray, which I wouldn't say I'm against, because there are times when you need to wait. Just sit and wait. For instance, Jesus, when he was about to be crucified, he went to the Garden of Gethsemane and he told the disciples to pray while he was in there talking to God. So that's passively praying. And there's also other times where, Jesus was walking amongst the crowds. He was carrying a cross up a hill, performing miracles, teaching, moving. It's this and that. It's both actively moving in God, but stopping and resting when He tells you. It is following God's promptings or acting, even when you feel His guidance is not overly obvious. And therefore, you have to move and believe in faith that no matter what I'm doing, even if I am moving in the wrong direction, God will bring me back to the center, to His intended path and the intended adventure that He has for me in my life, pursuing His truth in order to serve others and further His kingdom, despite me being an idiot. You have to believe that no matter what you do, there's nothing too big for God. And as long as you constantly go back and seek His guidance, counsel, and correction, He will correct your path. He will. If you come to Him with a correctly postured heart and good intentions that are more selfless than they are not, He will correct your path. And I also want to say that sometimes, I know in my story, for instance, I was unemployed and going through a breakup during the moment of time in my life when I know when I was on my knees begging to God for him to just fix my life essentially, or show me which way to go and how to interact with this world in a way that would more represent how he wants me to live. A lot of my desires then I think were selfish. They were, I want a job, I want something that pays a lot. I want to prove to everybody that I am something greater than just an unemployed person that just got dumped by his girlfriend. And I am better than the person that everyone seems to say that I am in the small town that I'm from, right? All these things were more, I want to do it for me and for the validation of others rather than please God. And God has since used those prayers, those requests to get me on the path. And as I am pursuing Him and seeking, He has transformed me along the way. And this is only because I have continuously went back to Him and asked for correction. Sometimes when He's corrected me, it's been with the hammer of God. I'm a hard learner at times, but I'm getting better at that, I would say. And we all will, as long as we don't take the blessings that God gives us along the way in our adventure and just use them to prop up ourselves rather than Him. And as you are taking action and doing things and walking out your faith in the belief that God is going to answer your prayers, you have to lie down your axiomatic predispositions. You have to lie down what you think was going to happen and what would be best for you. Is, as I said, the way that God answers prayers, a lot of the times, almost every time in my life, how He has answered the prayer has not been what I prayed for exactly. Because His understanding is so much greater than mine. Like my life is just that in His perspective. We're just but grains of sand in a huge desert. And yet He still cares about each grain of sand so much to move things for us in order to further His kingdom and to serve others. Therefore, the continuous and repetitive returning to God and seeking His counsel and guidance, it combats the inevitable filtering and twisting of our thoughts through selfish desires, whether that be a spiritual prompting or a sort of revelatory moment, or maybe just something you hear on the street from your friend. You can have tons of different influences in your life, or it could be subconscious things that are influencing you. Whatever that may be, when you come back to Him every day continuously, it's showing Him that, hey, I'm not enough to do this by myself. I can't. It also keeps our perspective from being narrowed, captured, and pulled down to what we are struggling with at that current moment. And it keeps us from having our dreams that are supplanted by God, hopefully. And why I say that is sometimes we can manifest dreams and say that it's God, but really it's just us. But again, that gets filtered out through continuously going back to Him and having Him correct you. But this, like I was saying, this also keeps you from having a narrow perspective and becoming, having tunnel vision, essentially, because God can, if you keep your focus to the treasures of heaven while also being attentive to what's right in front of you. With that in mind, you are building yourself for the moment that you come to the door that God is wanting you to knock on and that He'll open for you in a way where you can actually walk through it and go through the actions of finishing and knocking on the door without missing out on everything that you need to see on your way there because your focus becomes too narrowed. That is a part of focusing on the treasures of heaven that I think it gets missed amongst a lot of Christians, including myself, where I become so hyper focused on getting something that I feel God has told me to do done that I just miss out on everything He's trying to teach me along the way. Or I'll miss out on serving all these other people because I'm so inherently selfish. We all are, especially in the current day and age where social media is built on a platform and framework of narcissism where we are putting our own desires out there, what makes us happy, what makes ourselves happy. I just seen a short today where it was a Christian one, but it was someone that looked very attractive in the video, had revealing attire on. You could see their skin. And I'm not saying that's bad. It's not, but not inherently. Maybe, I don't know. But my point is the video was supposedly about Jesus, and the text about Jesus was like this big up in the corner of the video. And the main focus of the video was the person. And with the attire that was like revealing skin, and this woman was very beautiful. Do you think the average person is going to look at that video and think about Jesus? Honestly, why did they look at the video initially to begin with? Because of the little tiny text up in the top, or because this beautiful woman where you can see her skin right in the preview of this short? So the continuous coming back to God and submitting your life to Him as a body of work, being like, hey, Lord, please help me. I admit that I can't do this by myself. I need correction. He will point out those things. If you come to Him with a heart that is postured that you are not perfect and you are truly seeking correction, He will show you. He will show you. Keeps you from becoming selfish and putting yourself before God. It keeps you from having a narrow point of view and missing out on everything God wants you to do for the sake of others and His kingdom. And then finally, the knocking is, many times, I feel in many messages, the knocking is presented as sort of combined with the seeking. Maybe I'm just being judgmental like a fool. But when I think of knocking, I think about it as something being more akin to finishing the body of work, finishing the adventure, slaying the monster at the end of the cave, slaying whatever represents the trauma that has been holding you back for so many years, whether that be addiction to alcohol or drugs or pornography, or the addiction of validation coming from others, or defeating the stories that you tell yourself. I know knocking, like I said, gets transfused with seeking, but I really like thinking about it as finishing once you get to the door. You actually have to take the action and knock on it. This is represented in the story of Exodus, where Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt and through the wilderness. When they get to the promised land, they still have to go there and they see giants and they have to go fight things. They have to finish. They didn't just get to the door and God opens it and it's free. it's it's a beautiful place that has roses and flowers everywhere and there's honey. What do they say in the scripture? It's not just a land flowing with milk and honey that you can just go grab the jug of milk and start pouring, or grab the beehive and go get honey from it. Like there's bees in front of the beehive. They're going to protect it. You're going to get stung. It requires some sort of action in order to finish. That's how I like thinking of knocking. And while you are acting and taking up arms, swinging your metaphorical sword, while you are fighting the dragon or the monster at the end of the cave, that requires a sort of faith that God is watching you, because you've just got done going on this huge adventure to get to this door. And now you're like, really? I have to do this too? And I think a lot of people fall short there. I have a billion times, many times. And if I think about all the activities in my life that I am engaging in now, in this sort of format where it's an adventure and I'm coming to a door, I'm sure there's a lot of doors that I have been presented and I've just kind of walked from that God wanted me to walk through. Now I know He'll give me another chance in things that I have to do if I go back to Him and seek His counsel and seek His correction. If I'm willing to lay down my own desires, He'll give me another chance. I believe. There are some things I believe where when doors are closed, they're closed, which is scary. But God gave us free will, and those are the rules of the game that we have to play in. If we didn't have free will, we wouldn't be able to love our Father. It would just be, we'd be slaves, right? So there's a beauty to free will and there's a beauty to choice, but we have to take responsibility for our actions. Therefore, when you come to a door, you have to finish. I know in my life I've came to many doors and I've just walked away because I thought something that was maybe I gave too much validity to something that was untrue, and it was being propelled by fear within me due to trauma in my past or past experiences. And God's like, look, I know what this appears to be, but it's not that. And you need to trust me. And He'll give you many things in your life that look terrible up front, and everyone's going to tell you you're an idiot for doing. But that's the reason He wants you to do it, because it's going to grow your relationship with Him. You're going to have to be reliant on Him to make this thing work in this environment, the world. And that brings me to another thing that I am thinking about, wherein people, when they look at what you're doing to finish, to knock on the door, they may think you're crazy for doing what you're doing when you go through the actions. But they don't see things from your perspective, right? And just like that differentiation of perspectives, I was thinking about the knocking in that sort of way. And there's sometimes where God wants us to come to a door and He'll knock from the other side. And we have to be listening. So that takes the courage, the vigilance, and the discipline to drown out all the other sounds that are around us, focusing on the treasures of heaven while working with the subject matter that He has put right in front of us and lowering ourselves and listening for God's knock on the other side. There's a verse in the Bible in Revelations that John wrote. John supposedly wrote the book of the Bible, Revelations, and it is to a church called Laodicea. And Jesus is speaking about them, and He is describing the churchgoers as being lukewarm and how God will spit them out of His mouth, essentially. Because someone that's lukewarm is just afraid to overstep their boundaries that others have set upon them rather than the boundaries that God has set in their lives. They don't want to make too many other people angry. And on the other side of that, they don't want to engage in anything that will make them appear crazy or prop themselves up too much. They don't want to take a stand on either side of a point. They're just lukewarm. And God's like, I'll spit them out of my mouth. I'll just read the verse. It's in Revelations chapter 3, verse 20. And it is, to the church in Laodicea, to the angel of the church in Laodicea, right? These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear, so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. To those I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on His throne. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. This obviously can directly correlate with the sort of format of asking, seeking, and knocking. God said there, John's vision, I will be at the door and I'll knock and you have to hear me. And if you hear me, I'll open it up and you can come in and eat with me. But that requires you listening. So that kind of gives credence to there are times that you have to passively wait. And I think what God sees as passively waiting is different than what a lot of preachers and other Christians think of as passively waiting. There are times when you should just sit and pray. There's also times where you need to get up and move while you're praying. That is what builds your faith. You have to have the courage to finish, to listen, and to act. Sometimes to draw your sword, defeat the monsters in your life. Beware of the enemy trying to constantly pull you down or pull your focus down from that of the things of heaven and put your focus to things here on the earth. And over time, that'll start to corrupt your own desires and dreams to be tilted towards things that are self-fulfilling rather than purposed for the serving of others and furthering God's kingdom. And all of this sort of sums up to behavior that was enacted by Moses in that story where the Egyptians come and start chasing the Israelites as they are fleeing from Egypt. And I'll just read straight from the text here. It's a great moment. This flies at the face of a lot of Christian messaging today, I believe. And this is Exodus chapter 14, verse 10. It says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. Man, he was such a good leader. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Remember, he said that. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And that's directly God reprimanding Moses in a way. He's like, why are you crying out to me? Get up, finish what I've called you to do. That represents to me the knocking of the door. That's what I like to think of it as. It is raising your staff, splitting the sea. There may be things coming after you. It may have taken everything that you're made of to get to this place, but you have to finish. And it needs to be done with the full reliance and admittance of you requiring God's assistance and keeping your focus on the treasures of heaven and being mindful that the purpose of you doing all of this is for the sake of serving others and furthering his kingdom. And he will answer your prayers. He will present you to the door and he will give you the strength and courage to carry your cross while you knock on it, or for you to listen and quiet all the noise around you and hear him knocking from the other side. And once you hear, he'll open it up and you'll come in. I love that verse. Again, that was Exodus 14, and I started from verse 10. And I'll stop there for today. I don't know how long I've been going. What is this? Let me see. It's probably a long time. I've been going for 1 hour now. So when I come back, I am going to finish verses 9 through 12, and I'll give my assessment and perspective of those verses and what God has been leading me to and through, either from information that I have received from others and mentors, or just reading the text and doing research myself. I just talked an hour about 2 verses in the Bible. That's how amazing the Bible is. You have to wrestle with it. I've been focusing on these 5 verses for 2 or 3 weeks now. I have pages of notes. And if you've made it this far, I am extremely grateful for your time and attention. Please let me know anything I can improve upon when it comes to my delivery of the messages, when it comes to things I can say that will resonate with people you know, perhaps those that are downtrodden, the people that really need God, those that don't know Him, and those that do know Him but are acting in an accordance that is outside of God's true commandments in the Bible. I'll accept all criticism. I love you, and I hope this reaches you well. I hope you have a blessed rest of your day and week, night, whatever it is. Thank you for your time. I love you so much, and I thank you, God, for giving me the ability to actually talk this long about this subject. I I'm extremely grateful. I love you, and I'll see you next time.